We think it's only 5 preludes, right? Those are the 5 that remained, but originally there were 6 preludes for guitar. Villa-Lobos had a very strong commitment to define the identity of the Brazilian sound. These ideas will contribute to your interpretation. Hello everyone, my name is Douglas Lora, and I'm here today to talk about the 5 preludes for solo guitar by Heitor Villa-Lobos. This is such an important piece for the guitar repertoire and a very important piece within the Villa-Lobos output for solo guitar. He wrote a lot of music. He was a very prolific composer. He wrote music for symphonic orchestra, for string quartet, for choir, chamber music. You know, he has these huge collections like the Bachianas, the Choros, and he wrote a considerable amount of music for guitar. Not so much for solo guitar, though. He has music for guitar written in chamber music, like Distribuição de Flores, his arrangements of Bachianas number 5, the Sesteto Místico features guitar, and there are a few lost scores for solo guitar that he wrote, including a 6 prelude. Yeah, that's right. We think it's only 5 preludes, right? Those are the 5 that remained, but originally there were 6 preludes for guitar. The 6th prelude was lost, and we have statements by the composer himself, by Arminda Villa-Lobos, his second wife, the director of Museu Villa-Lobos, statements by Abel Carlevaro, by André Segovia, and Turibio Santos. They all mention about the existence of this 6th prelude that was lost. Unfortunately, we don't have any kind of register about that. But the main works for solo guitar of Villa-Lobos are not that many. And what these preludes represent within Villa-Lobos' output is his maturity when writing for solo guitar. So the preludes were written in 1940. And before that, we had the Suite Popular Brasileira. That's one of the earliest works by Villa-Lobos, written in 1908 and 1912, between that period. And then we have the famous Choros number 1, written in 1920. And after that, we have the 12 Etudes, written in 1929. So the preludes were written more than a decade after the 12 Etudes. And after the preludes, Villa-Lobos wrote the concerto for guitar. So it's a very strategic, it's a very interesting placement within Villa-Lobos' output, the preludes. So they represent Villa-Lobos' maturity. Villa-Lobos was a guitarist himself. He also played the cello. He was a cellist and a guitarist. And everybody knows the challenges of writing music for guitar if you're not a guitarist. In the case of Villa-Lobos, his intimacy with the instrument allowed him to develop and to create a repertoire of compositional devices that are very closely related to the idiom, to the guitarism, you know. So a lot of his music for solo guitar is based on these compositional devices. And these compositional devices, these innovations in technique, he experimented a lot on the 12 etudes, right? And he created etudes dedicated to each one of those devices. And then when it comes to the preludes, his maturity allows him to make use of those devices and pure composition in a more balanced way. And the devices I'm talking about, you probably already noticed. For example, the most important thing is the use of open strings. Villa-Lobos is a master in that. And he chooses friendly keys for the guitar, where you can use a lot of open strings. And this use of the open strings allows us to explore a deep resonance of the guitar, something that we take for granted sometimes. And the sympathetic resonances, right? The harmonics and everything. This is number 1. This is the most important. And from that, we have the pedal tones. So Villa-Lobos also uses a lot of these pedal notes, these constant notes that are there. And they could be chord or part of the chord or non-chordal tones. A very common compositional device that he uses in many of his pieces. We also have the parallel chords, the planning, chord planning, which means the things that is very guitaristic, like to take a chord and just move through the fretboard. And besides being guitaristic, this is a direct influence from the French Impressionism that Villa-Lobos was very influenced by. Debussy, Ravel, César Franck. So we're going to find these chord plannings a lot, and we're going to find that in the preludes as well. We have the combination of these pedal tones with the chord planning. And finally, the use of harmonics. Villa-Lobos uses the harmonics a lot, and he has a very particular way of notating these harmonics. As you probably can see, it's a little confusing sometimes, but the general rule is that he writes where you put your finger, not the resulting tone, the resulting note. He writes the place where you put your finger on. That's the note that he's going to write there. We're going to talk more about that when it comes to the specific preludes. But in a way, these preludes they are a balance. They synthesize all this repertoire of idiomatic devices that Villa-Lobos created during his career. So these pieces they are played around the world in concerts. They have hundreds of recordings, and I see that people neglect sometimes something very important about them, which are the subtitles, the dedications, the tributes. Each one of the preludes is a tribute to a Brazilian archetype or a Brazilian landscape. And you know that Villa-Lobos had a very strong commitment to define the identity of the Brazilian sound. He was a very nationalistic composer, and he had a strong connection to nature, a strong connection to the Amazon forest, a strong connection to the native indigenous people, connection with the northeastern culture, the northeastern landscapes, and of course the connection with choro music, because he used to play choro music, and choro is the most authentic Brazilian music as a urban style that was born in the end of the 19th century in Rio de Janeiro. So Villa-Lobos has this influence through all his music, and his commitment is a commitment to. He's a Brazilian ambassador, so he brings a lot of these Brazilian elements to his music. So when you look at the preludes and you look at those tributes, those homages, those subtitles, you have to take them more seriously and understand what they represent, what kind of characteristics they bring to the music itself. It's far from being a programmatic music, a descriptive music, but these images, they will contribute to your interpretation. They will give you some narratives, some images that can situate you better when you play this music in your guitar. Yeah, so these pieces were written in 1940, right? And the first edition by Max Eschig in 1954. And then we have the Frederick Sigant edition in 2007. And this edition, it's a critical edition and has a very nice text in the beginning about these tributes. Let's talk about the subtitles for each of the preludes. The prelude number 1 has a subtitle that says Homenagem ao sertanejo brasileiro, melodia lírica. Sertanejo is the inhabitant of the sertão. Sertão is a landscape in Brazil that spreads out through the northeastern region to the central region of Brazil. It's a very dry and arid, hot, very tough. It's very tough to live there. And it's a very poor area in Brazil, financially, structurally, but very rich in terms of folkloric manifestation and culture. This first prelude is about the dweller, is about the peasant that lives in this area, these workers that have to survive under this strong sun, the strong heat, and have to walk several miles to work on someone else's land, just to get the basics to provide for their families, for his families. And so it's a very tough life. It's suffered. So this is the main idea for the part, principally for the part A of, and we're going to talk more about the forms of each prelude, very important. But the prelude number 1 is divided in 2 parts. You have the minor part and the major part. The minor part is sad, it's darker. And that is the representation of this peasant, of this dweller in his daily life. Now the part B is it's major, it's sparkling, it's open, it's brighter. And that's an allusion for the viola caipira, which I'm also going to show a video of this instrument, very popular in Brazil. And it's a steel string, small guitar with 5 double courses, and played in a open E major tuning, and it's used through to the whole country, but mainly, principally in the sertão, in these areas, and they are related to celebration, to gathering, to a happy moment. So these are the contrast between these 2 parts in Prelude number 1. It's all about the life, the way of life that happens in this area of Brazil, the sertão brasileiro, right? So these are ideas will contribute to your interpretation. Okay, the sound of the viola caipira, and the images of these inhabitants of this place. Hopefully, they will give you more inspiration, and they will help your creativity when you play this prelude. Prelude number 2 is dedicated to the malandro carioca. Carioca is the person that lives in Rio de Janeiro, and malandro could be translated as a rascal, as a pickpocket. So it's this guy that wants to take advantage of every situation, right? And very archetypal figure in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro. And of course, that the origins of this figure is from the social injustices that happens, that are very evident in Brazil until today. But this malandro, the walk of the malandro, the ginga the malandro, which is a word that comes from the capoeira. And capoeira is this martial arts. It's much more than that. It's a dance, it's a religion, it's a way of life. And it's the capoeira was born in Brazil. There's some discrepancies about where the capoeira was born, if it was in Angola or if it was in Brazil, but it has a direct influence of African roots. And the capoeira has all this way of this movement, the ginga of the capoeira, that is reflected in this prelude. I want to talk a lot about this prelude. The part A, for example, is a choro, and the way the melody is constructed with the harmony, and the movements, the melodic movements that happens within this harmony, it suggests this kind of movement, this kind of ginga, of this slide, this sinuous path. And the part B of this prelude is a direct allusion to the berimbau, which is a very interesting and rudimentary instrument played on the capoeira. And I'm going to show you some images of this instrument and some sounds of these instruments as well. But that also gives a completely different idea when you interpreted this piece. Because again, here Villa-Lobos constructs this prelude in two parts, very contrasting parts. And he's making this allusion of these two very characteristic figures of Brazil, the malandro, the rascal of Rio de Janeiro, and the capoeira culture. Then we go to the prelude number 3, which it's very different from all the others because it has an homage to Bach, to Johann Sebastian Bach. The only one that doesn't have like a Brazilian dedicative, but actually it represents much more than that. First of all, Villa-Lobos was a huge fan of Johann Sebastian Bach. You can see his collection of Bachianas, a huge body of work for all kinds of different instrumentations. There's the Bachianas number 5 that we have like transcription for an arrangement for guitar, very famous guitar and voice, right? But it represents the Brazilian characteristic of having a culture that embraces foreign cultures without losing its identity. So the history of Brazilian music, the history of Brazilian people, of the country, it's all about that. It's a mixture of different cultures and different elements that creates something really unique. So the Bach dedication here, it's the way that Villa-Lobos represents this characteristic of Brazilian music of embracing everything and still being Brazilian. So it's interesting here because although it says Bach, but there is also a very strong European influence on this prelude, which is the French Impressionism. It's Bach, it's Debussy. Villa-Lobos was a very good friend of Darius Milhaud and Arthur Rubinstein, and he was always up to date to the music that was written in Europe. He lived in Paris, so he has a very strong connection with French music, right? And you can see in his works that several elements of the Impressionism is present in his music. So the prelude number 3 is not only an homage to Bach, but also to the French Impressionist composers. I see that prelude, it's divided into 2 parts as well. And part A has the characteristics of the French music. Doesn't have like a clear tonal center. And in this prelude specifically, Villa-Lobos explores like the open strings of the guitar are part of the musical material itself. And we're going to talk a lot about that too. So the part A is like that, but the part B, it's that pedal notes figure, very common in Baroque. It's almost like a cliche in Baroque era and Bach's compositions. But in a way that sounds really Brazilian. So this is the representation of Villa-Lobos, of this characteristic of Brazil as a country, as a nation, of embracing all kinds of cultures to its own identity. Then we get to prelude number 4, which is dedicated to the Brazilian indigenous people. And Villa-Lobos made several trips to the Amazon forest, and he spent time with indigenous tribes, and he researched it a lot. He wrote a lot of music that it's based on chants of indigenous tribes. And he created a myth around himself about this explorer that used to go to the jungles and used to go to the forests and collect musical materials. So the indigenous element in Villa-Lobos' music is really strong. So this prelude number 4 is the portrait of that side of Villa-Lobos' musical uh, creativity, musical inspiration, and of course that it all comes from a perspective from the Western civilization to what is the indigenous culture, and from that perspective, everything is very simple and primitive and constrained in small forms, and the melodies are short and with close intervals. We have ostinatos, right? Rhythmic ostinatos. So there's always this opposition of elements of these main chants with the rhythmic repetition, right? So very, very beautiful, simple, but it's like a little jewel, the prelude number 4. And finally, we get to prelude number 5, which is the last one in this collection. That was 6, but now it's only 5. And that's a very interesting subtitle. It says Homenagem à vida social, aos rapazinhos e mocinhas que frequentam os concertos e teatros do Rio de Janeiro. Rapazinhos e mocinhas frescas que frequentam o teatro, os concertos. It means homage to the social life, to the fresh young boys and girls that go to concerts and theaters in Rio de Janeiro. So it doesn't have anything of pejorative in this fresh. It just is referring to the effervescence of Rio de Janeiro at that point in the beginning of the 20th century. As you know, Rio de Janeiro became Brazilian center during the 19th century when the royal family from Portugal, that's early in the 19th century, in 1808, they moved to Brazil, running away from Napoleon troops. And they brought everything with them, all the cultural life, all the instruments, all the music, all the dances, all the musicians, all everything. And they built palisades, they built concert halls, they built cafes, and Rio de Janeiro became actually a metropolis in South America, an European metropolis in South America. And there was a golden age of cultural golden age in Rio de Janeiro. So this prelude is a portrayal of that period, and it's interesting because it shares a lot of characteristics with the pieces from the Suite Popular Brasileira. So in a way, is closing a cycle, talking about the preludes as represented the maturity of Villa-Lobos as a composer, right? So he take elements from the etudes and everything that he developed during his lives, and he applies here on the preludes. But also he mentions the simplicity of the Suite Popular Brasileira in this prelude, which is a waltz. It's written in 6/4, but it's a waltz. Yeah, it's very, very simple, very Brazilian in a way, but very European, very characteristic of Villa-Lobos in the sense of the voicings, the very close voicings, the chords very close to the melody. We have some specific points to talk about this prelude. But just to close this introduction, you know that the preludes, they are part of a set, but they work as individual pieces. Each one of the preludes has a beginning and an end, and they could be just played by itself.